Okay, the last question is actually mine. We had a previous question about the Texas textbook standards changes that were just made.
Right.
And Rob, what would you say to parents who have kids in the school system who say, oh my goodness, I don't want these textbooks getting into the hands of my kids, what do I do?
There are a couple of things. Number one, this is going to vary from state to state, but the powers of the state school board vary. Some have more power than others. How do these people get on the board? Are they elected? Are they appointed by the governor? Find out. Be paying attention to that. I know here in Kansas this has been an ongoing problem as well. I was here in the year 2000 speaking in a couple of cities because there was the big fight of recreationism back then, and the board just kind of keeps shifting, trading hands and going back and forth between a moderate faction and a more conservative faction. So you're already ahead of that. You know how your board is composed. You know how the people get on it. Be paying attention to that. The second thing, in Texas especially, I think this is relevant, is that the legislature has the power to rein in that board. And as the board continues to get farther and farther out there on the fringe, they may start to take away some of their powers. And other state legislatures would have that ability too. Now, if you've got an extremely conservative state legislature, they may be reluctant to do that, but it's something that you always need to be looking at and working at through organizations that are advocated for the purpose of public education. The third thing is this, and this is maybe the trickiest thing of all to figure out. And I speak as someone who has two children in the public school system, and I'm not sure I would even know the answer to this myself where I live in Maryland. What effect do state standards really have on what goes on in the classroom every day? There have been some studies that have found that standards in the area of science especially don't necessarily impact what goes on in the classroom in the way you would think. There's a group in California called the National Center for Science Education. They defend the teaching of evolution. And they have looked at state standards, and what they have found is that some states have really good standards for the state. They sound real nice. They advocate that evolution will be taught. They even go into specifics about what and when. But in a lot of classrooms, it's not happening. So that's the thing to find out. Are these standards something that exists on paper that somebody just signs off on and they go off into the ether, or do they really impact what gets into the textbooks and what works its way down to the classroom? How much leeway does an individual teacher have to introduce other types of material? That can cut both ways. One of the things the religious right's been trying to do in some states is win the right to introduce supplemental material into science class. That's the effort to let the creationist teacher or the teacher who favors intelligent design bring material into the class and counter evolution. So you've got to look out for that. But it can also have a more positive effect in some cases, because if the standards are bad, you can supplement with something that's better. At the end of the day, we just have to be watching what's going on and paying attention to school board races locally, the races at the state level. Be involved, especially if you have children in the schools, and even if you don't, to be supportive of public education, because it's something that, it affects all of us whether you think it does or not, to have an educated population. Sometimes people think, well, my children are grown, or I'm retired, I don't care about the schools anymore. But that's really, I think, kind of a short-sighted view to have. We want the next generation to be well-educated, if only for the reason that they're going to be ones making the decisions at some point down the line, and that they may affect you as well.
My experience of 40 years in education is it should be abandoned and or tolerated at best. And what I mean by that is that really, if the mass of people, the parents and the children, said we are going to learn, regardless of the institutions, it's good to have the institutions on your side. They ought to be doing their job. But my long acquaintance with this process is so dismal. Not so much for religious controversy, but just sheer incompetence and dullness and stupidity, that I think I would look at it the other way. If everyone, all the parents in the United States said, everyone will know who Thomas Paine is, or Jefferson, we don't care what the government says, we would win the day. I mean, what I'm advocating is an end run, and I'm not saying don't make the old traditional plays, but an end run can also work if it takes hold amongst the people, which happened in the 19th century before there were public schools. People said, look, we just have to educate ourselves, and they very good results sometimes.
Let me just add something to that, and this is a little bit off topic, but it's something I feel strongly about, and as someone who does have 2 children. I have a daughter who will be 16 on Monday. That's been interesting. And a son who's 12. And my wife and I have never assumed that public education is the be-all and end-all of what our children learn. That's absurd. Their education has been an ongoing process that we've been actively involved in literally from the day they were born. We read books to them before they could know what books were and just thought they could chew on them. And always made sure we had an intellectual environment in our home. Turned off the television. We don't have cable. We limit the amount of exposure they get to things like that. Screens are fine for certain things, but screens are not what you should be interacting with most of the time, I think. It's not what you want for your children.